1. So let me just start off by saying that my entire life I have had encounters with the paranormal. So many that now, at a month shy of being 25, I have enough stories of my encounters to write a novel if I wanted to. I'm not sure if I'm sensitive to these types of things, if I'm some sort of paranormal magnet, or maybe it's both. The town where I grew up, while being a very urban area just a few minutes outside of the city border of the west side of Chicago, has always had a very small town feel. A good number of the families here have been here for multiple generations, most of us knowing each other's families, neighbors, friends, that sort of thing. I grew up, since the age of 4, in the house my mother bought directly next to my grandparents' house, which is the house my mother grew up in. My mother still owns and lives in this house to this day, my grandmother still being her next-door neighbor in the same house she's been in for decades. There's a few families in our immediate area who have all stayed within close proximity. One in particular being a family who owns several homes in my block, all starting in the house across the street from my mother's house, where that whole family grew up that was still owned by that family. One of the daughters, who was previously living out of state with her husband and children, was my mom's childhood best friend. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my mom's friend moved back into her childhood home directly across the street from us, with her husband and children. It was summer, and I was a pretty active kid who loved being outside. I also was an incredibly social kid, who would stop and make friends with any fellow kid I met in the neighborhood. The day my mom's friend's family was moving into that house, I was outside on my bike just riding up and down the block, when I noticed a young girl around my age, standing on the front lawn of that house, waving at me. Knowing my mom's friend had kids and just being social in general, I immediately dropped my bike and ran across the street to go say hi. We talked briefly after her telling me her parents, her older sister, and her older brother were moving into her grandpa's house. She told me how excited she was, and how even more excited she was to meet a new friend, and how cool it was that I lived directly across the street. I was super excited too, not only to meet a new friend, but to have a new friend that was my neighbor. I told her that I'd introduce her to more kids in the area because I knew the vast majority of local kids. She was really happy about that. Our conversation was very brief, and she ended it by saying she should probably go inside, but she'll see me around, and she was happy to meet me. She went in. I went back to my bike, and oddly enough, I never saw her again. I spent the remainder of the summer playing outside with my friends as usual, but looking for my new neighbor friend, never seeing her. I asked my mom about her friend's daughter, and the only daughter my mom would refer to was the older daughter, who my new friend referred to as her older sister. So my mom and I were definitely not talking about the same girl. Being that age, I didn't want to question my mom too much, despite being really confused, so I eventually just left it alone. Over time, as I grew up, the memory of the young girl I met outside the day my neighbors moved in faded from my mind. When I was a teenager, I ended up learning that the reason my mom's friend moved back with her family was because she had lost her young daughter to cancer and wanted to be close to her family as they were living out of state for some years at the time her daughter passed away. Never once did what happened later click in my head or cross my mind. Fast forward to a few years ago. I was about 21 years old. My mom's friend and her family had now been my neighbors for over a decade. I had grown to know my mom's friend very well, not only being my neighbor and a family friend, but a regular customer at the local grocery store I worked at. She was very well known in the community. She worked for the town. And as I was at work one day at the grocery store, I quickly found out that she had passed away earlier that day from a sudden massive heart attack. It was a very sad time, and my mother was devastated as she was my mom's lifelong friend. I decided to go with my mother to her friend's wake to pay my respects to my neighbor and family friend. As I said earlier, she was very well known in the community, so she had a large number of people attend her wake. There was a very long line to the casket, and as my mother and I were waiting, the funeral home had TV screens of alternating photos the family had chosen that were on display for everyone attending to see. As we were waiting, my mom was watching the screen and looking at the photos, and turns to me and says, "Look, how sweet this photo is. The little girl in the photo with her is her daughter that passed away." That's when I turned to look, and the second I did, I felt my blood run cold. The young girl in the photo was the exact girl I met outside, many years earlier the day they moved in. The daughter my mom's friend tragically lost to cancer was the new friend I had made that day and never saw again. I asked my mom without explaining why I was asking, "When did she pass away again?" To which my mother replied, "Before they moved in across the street. Remember me telling you that's why they moved back? She wanted to be close to her family after her daughter died." I just nodded to my mom and said nothing, as I felt almost frozen, with chills that I can't explain. I still wonder to this day if anyone else saw her, or if I was simply a kid standing in that front lawn across the street alone, talking to myself. I'm not sure why she chose me to talk to, but she did. All I can say with absolute certainty that the little girl who tragically lost her battle to cancer before her family moved across the street from me was the little girl I met that day. Wherever the afterlife takes us, I hope both her and her mother are at peace. 2. The last week of July last year, I went to Ocean City, Maryland with my boyfriend at the time. The first few nights were great. I got to see a longtime friend who lives there, and he was tagging along with us the night it happened. My boyfriend and my friend decided they wanted to get crab fries. I wasn't interested because I just don't like Old Bay on fries. I'm sorry. Sue me. So I decided to sit on the bench and wait for them. I saw a family go by, and I saw their daughter walking behind them. She looked really mad and was texting quickly as if she was in a really heated argument. She had short bleached white hair and really sick tattoos. That's what made her stick out to me, her tattoos. They were awesome. So anyway, my boyfriend and friend came back over, and we walked behind that family for a while. We ended up getting distracted by the boardwalk performers, and I lost sight of them. I didn't think anything of it, though. Around 2 a.m., we were some of the only people on the boardwalk besides the small groups of drunk teenagers, smoking cigarettes and yelling. And I saw her again, running towards the beach crying. I wanted to go after her and ask if she was okay, but my boyfriend advised me to just stay out of it and keep going. We went to our hotel and fell asleep. At about 6 a.m., I got up and rolled a joint and quietly left the room. The hotel we were staying at had a nice sitting area out front, looking over the ocean. I admired the view for a few minutes when I noticed her again. She was walking down the boardwalk, looking confused and scared. She was crying still. I got this weird gut feeling to follow her. I tucked my joint into my clutch and followed a little behind her. She looked nervous and was looking left and right as if she was lost. I followed her all the way to the second beach ramp. She suddenly burst into a full-length sprint, crying hysterically. I don't know why, but I shouted, "Hey, wait, do you need help?" I ran to the beach and just stood in shock. Nobody was there, but I could hear soft sobbing nearby to the right of me. I walked down the beach a little ways before I saw it. Where the sobbing sounds had left me, there was an arm sticking out of the sand. It was her arm. It was her tattoos. I'll never forget them. The sobbing stopped, and suddenly the ambient noises of the beach became louder again. I didn't notice at the time, but the whole time I was following her, and then following her crying, everything else was completely silent. When I realized what I was looking at, I screamed for someone to call 911. A middle-aged couple came jogging up. The wife screamed, and the husband dialed them right away. I didn't have my phone with me. I don't like when sand ends up in the charging port. The police arrived a little while later. When they took my statement, I didn't even know what to tell them. I said I had been walking down the beach and just found her. It took them hours to dig her out. When they finally started to pull her out, they asked that all the civilians and witnesses be led away. As we were walking with the police to a nearby spot to answer more questions, I saw her standing behind them, looking down at her own body. She looked up at me, nodded, and then she was gone. Initially, the reports all said that she sat in a hole and it collapsed around her. but then it was later discovered that the big sand cleaners may have pushed the sand into the hole by mistake. But here's where it gets scary. She had been missing since 2 a.m. She died somewhere between 2 and 3 a.m., and yet I saw and followed her. The entire time, I swear she looked real. I still have dreams about her. I have never forgotten a single detail. 3. So when I was in high school, my parents let my band rehearse in one of their rental houses. It was my stepmom's sister's family house that all passed away in a horrible car accident years before my father and I came into the picture. From the time when we started using the house when we were 15 until we were in early 20s, the creepiness kind of escalated. I remember one of the first things to happen was just odd noises in the kitchen that myself and the other guys could hear. We slept on the floor sometimes that had an open transition to the gutted kitchen area. As time went on, being dumb for still sleeping in the same area, we started using our lights to actually look to see something instead of being scared kids. I vividly remember hearing footsteps on the bare plywood floor along with my drummer. We both pulled our phones out to see the dust rising off the floor with the sound of each step. We both just looked at each other with fear, and just did our best to go back to sleep. Time passes with this happening with regular occurrence, so we move all of our bed pallets to the master bedroom at the front of the house. The first night that we stay in there, we're joking about how whatever it was in the house can't get us now that there's a door to protect us. With the TV and lights still on, the doorknob to the room audibly begins to turn. I look at my two buddies. They begin to freak out, thinking there's someone in the house. My drummer and I get up, count down to each other, and bust through the door, expecting to tackle an intruder, hoping it's just one of our friends. Nobody there. We go back to the bedroom and shut the door. As soon as we lay back down in our beds, the whole door violently starts shaking, as if it's locked with someone frantically trying to get in. It does this like 4 times for probably 20 seconds at a time. We just turned the TV up as loud as it would go until it stopped altogether that night. Later on, we got a new bass player that was semi-dependable about coming to practice. Well, he was supposed to show up late one night for practice. Drummer wakes up to him talking in one of the back bedrooms, pacing back and forth. When we wake up the next morning, he starts complaining about the bass player waking him up all night. I told him it might have been one of the other guys waking up, doing something, because bass player never came over. He still swears he could clearly hear his voice specifically. Flash forward to after graduation, we're doing music full-time, more or less as a job. The band passed out in the bedroom, and I pass out on the couches in the corner between the 2 living rooms. I open my eyes and see a dark silhouette of a head peering around the corner of the open doorway, staring at me. It was clearly a tiny person, but dark enough that I couldn't make out any detail other than the cheeks and eye sockets. I start blinking. It won't go away. Each time I blink, it would even change position slightly. I just closed my eyes as tight as I could for what seemed like forever, eventually opening them to whatever it was having disappeared. Flash forward a bit. Drummer and I are loading back in all our gear after a show. We just said screw it and passed out in the living room. He wakes up to a middle-aged woman in a red dress leaning over him, staring. He tells me about it the next day, absolutely terrified. Well, eventually, when I was about 19, I just moved into the place full-time. The occurrences got worse when I was alone. Doorknobs turning, sounds of things falling in bedrooms with nothing in them, whispering, etc. I eventually just started yelling at whatever was causing it to shut the fuck up. And it would always immediately stop, at least momentarily. I just got so desensitized by the regularity and coming to the thought that it was super cool that a haunted house was super metal to rehearse and live in. I even thought that if it wanted to hurt me or my friends, it would have already done so by this point. January 7th, 2011. That house burned to the ground after everyone left that afternoon. The fire marshal could only guess the breaker box sparked and caught fire. I joked quite a bit with everyone else I experienced these things with, that the demons or whatever it was got mad when we started going along with it, and just burned it down to go bug someone else. At least until I bought the house I live in now. My wife and I regularly see shadow people crossing the hall when we're in our living room. Our dog and cat constantly get scared by something in rooms that we're not in, scampering out. I'm strongly confident that something bad happened in this house, and that something just won't leave. Thanks for listening to my story. 4. When I was around 13 or 14, 25 now, I lived in Des Plaines, Illinois at my grandmother's house. One day I was sleeping in the basement in a room that used to be a tool and work room, but was converted to a bedroom, and I was waking up from a nap. It was probably around 3 to 5 p.m. I heard the door at the end of the hallway open, and the outline of a man coming through the door and into the hallway. My parents had left to take my siblings to a doctor's appointment, so I thought that they were back, and that the figure was my dad since he liked to prank us like that. I yelled at the figure a few times, saying it wasn't funny and that I'm trying to sleep. Here's where things get creepy. As I was saying this, I started feeling like I was in danger. When I would see my dad in the middle of trying to prank me, he would just abandon the prank. This figure stayed quiet and walked to the end of the hallway on the edge of the room. I quickly get up and run towards the other entrance where there are stairs. I keep looking in the direction of the figure. It was all dark, and I felt that creepy feeling. Then, while I'm looking, the figure makes like a choking noise, falls to the floor, and started convulsing, it seemed. As it was convulsing, I heard an overwhelmingly loud whoosh noise, like that of a strong wind or heavy-duty fan. I bolted up the stairs immediately and asked my grandmother if my parents were back yet, and she said no. Details on the house. When she bought it, it had a built-in bar from the 20s in the main room of the basement, which she has since removed, and this huge, weird safe in one of the rooms on the side of the bar that, even to this day, smells like something is rotting in it. The smell is only contained to that room. Prior to this experience, my parents and me had some minor ones, seeing shadows, the feeling of being watched, etc. This wasn't that unusual to us because we're Muslims and have had experiences with jinn. However, after this incident, I never really saw anything again, and the house's energy has toned down some. One thing that remains consistent is how almost every week my grandmother would have to reset every clock in her house, because they would end up being wildly off time. It's gotten to the point where, wherever she is, the clocks all change to some weird time and she has to reset it. Primarily with car clocks, stove clocks, and wall clocks. I'm just curious as to what people might consider this experience. 5. Maybe this is a coincidence, or I am just looking for a sign. But these are the thoughts that came after learning of my cousin's death. It was Monday at 7:03 p.m. when my cousin Brandon called me. Brandon was a drug addict, and he stopped coming around for dinner and really only called when he wanted me to ask around for drugs. I didn't take the call as I figured he would call back in 20 minutes like he usually does. As the night came to a close, I noticed some odd happenings around my house. Now, I know I have written about weird things in my house, but nothing like this has ever happened before. It was around midnight when I was heading to bed. I got into bed and heard creaking on my floor. I ignored it, thinking it was my daughter trying to sneak into bed with me. After that, I felt a very clear bump to the side of my bed, and it felt like someone sat down. I looked around and no one was there. I laid back down, kind of creeped out, when I clearly felt someone playfully grab my foot and shake my toes. I sat up instantly. No one there. And I kicked my feet at the sheets, went to sleep, and nothing else. It was the next day, Tuesday, when I got a call at 4:30 p.m. that Brandon had died. At first I thought he died sometime in the morning or afternoon, but as I was going to sleep that night, I remembered the happenings from the previous night. As I was trying to sleep, I felt someone's hand on my back. I freaked out but managed to fall asleep. I want to know the time he died, but the police said 8 to 10 weeks for that info. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 107. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Regarding streaming this weekend, I think I might do one. I'm not 100% decided yet, but if I do one, I might switch it to Sunday this week, as opposed to the usual Saturday when I've been doing them. So if I do one, it will be on Sunday, but I'll try and put up a notice about an hour before it goes live, just so I don't catch everybody unaware. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.